Hey everyone. Tonight we are leaving behind our modern world of instant messages and dating apps to explore what romance looked like in medieval times and beyond. Imagine swapping your smartphone for a thick wool tunic that has never been near a washing machine, stepping into a torchlit castle hall, and attempting to flirt while an entire court watches and judges every move you make. You probably would not last a full week in this environment because the complete absence of modern hygiene and the overwhelming number of heavily armed relatives would likely wear you down by Tuesday. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content. Also, tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. Now, lower the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for a gentle background hum, and settle into tonight's journey. You step out of the sharp night air and lean against the enormous stone wall of a crowded 12th century great hall. Your body slowly adjusts to the sudden warmth, feeling a powerful wave of heat radiating from the hearth. You do your best to disappear into the shifting shadows cast by iron sconces mounted high on the pillars. The atmosphere inside is dense, warm, and deeply immersive. The air carries the rich smell of roasted venison dripping into open flames, the earthy scent of damp rushes scattered across the floor to absorb spilled ale, and the unmistakable combination of unwashed wool and wood smoke that defines everyday life in the Middle Ages. Everyone around you wears multiple layers of heavy fabric, velvet, brocade, and rough homespun linen, making each movement seem slow, deliberate, and muted. Your attention is immediately drawn toward the center of the hall near the vast hearth where logs as large as tree trunks crackle softly, sending glowing sparks drifting upward through the soot-darkened chimney. There, a young squire and the daughter of a nobleman are engaged in a carefully structured conversation. They are practicing what the French courts call courtly love, a highly complicated game of romantic strategy in which every glance, posture, and spoken word follows strict social expectations. You watch the young squire take a cautious step forward, his leather boots producing a soft clicking sound against the stone floor. His gaze remains fixed on the young woman, who sits neatly upon a carved wooden bench, guiding a bone needle through a piece of white linen embroidery. He cannot simply walk up to her, offer a compliment, or ask her name. Doing so would violate the unwritten rules of chivalry, and could easily result in his removal by the castle guards. Instead, according to the customs of the noble classes, he must behave as though he is suffering from a serious illness caused entirely by her beauty. You notice him pause and draw a deep breath, causing his velvet doublet to tighten slightly across his chest. He places a trembling hand over his heart and tilts his head with an expression of dramatic suffering that appears almost humorous from a modern perspective. Then he begins reciting a lengthy poem that he undoubtedly spent several sleepless nights memorizing by candlelight. He compares her eyes to distant stars shining across the midnight sky, and her smile to the first light of dawn breaking through a mist-covered valley. The young woman does not immediately acknowledge him. She neither smiles nor nods, because doing so would disrupt the delicate ritual. Instead, she keeps her eyes fixed on her embroidery, pretending complete indifference to the emotional turmoil she is supposedly causing. One fascinating detail about this period, often misunderstood today, is that according to the formal rules of courtly love described by medieval writers such as Andreas Capellanus, true romantic love was believed to be impossible within marriage itself. Because noble marriages were largely treated as political and economic arrangements designed to secure land, strengthen alliances, or resolve family conflicts, genuine passion and emotional devotion were expected to exist outside the marital relationship. As a result, these elaborate courtly interactions were rarely intended to lead to marriage. They were meant to remain suspended in a permanent state of longing, serving as a beautiful and socially acceptable performance of desire under the watchful gaze of the entire court. You watch the squire shift awkwardly from one foot to the other, his heavy wool cloak brushing softly around his ankles as time passes. He appears deeply uncomfortable, and a small bead of sweat slowly rolls down his temple, catching the warm orange light of the fire. His voice falters slightly as he reaches the fourth stanza of his poem, while his hands gesture vaguely toward the timber ceiling to emphasize his suffering. The endurance required to stand in a smoky, draft-filled hall and speak dramatically about your own heartbreak for half an hour is genuinely impressive. Historical evidence suggests that courtly love was an idealized literary tradition celebrated by traveling troubadours, yet the reality of how it functioned remains a subject of debate. Historians still question whether ordinary people beyond the castle walls ever participated in these exhausting rituals, or whether courtly love existed primarily as a fantasy enjoyed by wealthy aristocrats with abundant leisure time and little else to occupy their attention. To a modern observer, the exchange resembles a slow-motion collision of social anxiety and forced conversation, standing in complete contrast to the casual nature of contemporary relationships. If someone attempted this dramatic approach in a modern cafe, the staff might call security or hand over information for a counseling service. Yet here, within this medieval hall, it represents the height of elegance and romantic sophistication. Around them, the hall continues its steady rhythm. Older knights sit at long tables discussing grain taxes, pig harvests, and weapon mates, their deep voices creating a low, comforting background murmur beneath the squire's determined performance. At last, the young woman lifts her head. Her movement is so measured and graceful that it seems carefully rehearsed. She gives him a tiny nod, her eyelids fluttering just enough to signal that his poetry has met approval. This subtle gesture serves as the medieval equivalent of finally receiving a reply after days of anxious waiting. Relief immediately spreads across the young squire's face. His shoulders relax, the tension leaves his chest, and he releases a quiet breath, careful not to disturb the fragile atmosphere of the moment. The mood of the great hall seems to settle alongside them. Torchlight flickers across faded tapestries hanging from the stone walls, depicting ancient hunts and mythical creatures resting in enchanted forests. From a distant corner comes the faint sound of a wooden lute being tuned, its strings producing a slow, repetitive melody that blends perfectly with the steady rhythm of your own breathing. As you continue watching from the shadows, you realize that courtship here is never private. It is a public performance where a single misplaced gesture, an overly eager smile, or an unauthorized touch could damage a family's reputation for generations. You take a deep breath of the warm, smoky air and allow the quiet stillness of the hall to settle over you as you prepare to follow the strange and winding path of medieval romance further into the night. The squire takes another small step forward, never breaking eye contact, while the flames in the great hearth burn slightly lower, filling the hall with a soft amber glow that invites you to relax, quiet your thoughts, and listen to the steady rhythm of the past. You leave behind the suffocating tension and constant scrutiny of the great hall, slipping through a heavy oak door reinforced with iron studs and stepping into the cool, damp night air of the castle's outer bailey. The change is immediate and grounding. The smooth, warm stone beneath your feet is replaced by thick, sticky mud that clings to the soles of your leather shoes with every deliberate step. You follow a narrow dirt path, winding away from the fortified walls toward the edge of the nearby ancient forest, guided only by the faint glow of a crescent moon that occasionally emerges from behind layers of drifting clouds. The air is crisp and refreshing, carrying the scent of wet grass, decaying autumn leaves, and the cool breeze sweeping down from distant hills. Ahead stands a small, crooked wooden hut, sheltered beneath the twisted branches of an old willow tree. A thin ribbon of gray smoke curls lazily upward from a hole in its thatched roof. Within this cramped hut, with its packed earth floor, lives the village healer, a person whose secret assistance you have decided you desperately need after your efforts at courtly poetry ended in complete failure. Having exhausted ordinary methods, you have turned to supernatural intervention in hopes of winning the affection of your beloved. You push open the crooked, creaking door and step into a low-ceilinged room filled with the powerful scents of dried rosemary, hanging sage, damp earth, and something sharp, metallic, and difficult to identify. The interior feels warm and enclosed, illuminated only by the soft orange glow of dying embers smoldering in the center of the room. The healer, an elderly woman with intelligent eyes set deep within her weathered face and hands, darkened by years of digging roots and crushing berries, bends over a clay pot that bubbles quietly atop an iron tripod. In the medieval imagination, if flattering words and costly gifts failed to capture someone's heart, a love potion surely could. People believed that the physical world was deeply connected to unseen spiritual forces. You watch the healer toss a handful of crushed beetles into the simmering liquid, followed by a thick clump of damp green moss, carefully gathered from the northern side of an ancient oak during a full moon. One particularly fascinating detail about medieval matchmaking recipes is how intensely personal and, by modern standards, deeply unpleasant their ingredients often were. Healers frequently instructed desperate lovers to include powdered sparrow hearts, ashes from burned dove feathers, or even finely ground fragments of their own hair and fingernails. These practices stemmed from a widespread belief in sympathetic magic, the idea that physical objects retained a permanent spiritual connection to their original owner. By consuming these personal elements, the intended target was thought to become emotionally and physically drawn to the person who supplied them. You watch as the liquid darkens into a murky shade of muddy brown, resembling less a romantic potion and more the contents of a drained engine. Historians continue to debate whether village healers genuinely believed in the magical power of these mixtures, or whether they were simply running a profitable trade that catered to lonely peasants and anxious nobles alike. From a modern perspective, the dangers appear enormous. The possibility of severe illness caused by unidentified herbs, spoiled ingredients, or toxic plants seems remarkably high. It quickly becomes apparent that finding love in the medieval world required both an iron stomach and an extraordinary amount of desperate faith. The healer stirs the bubbling mixture with a smooth wooden stick, creating a steady scraping sound against the clay pot that fills the hut with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Outside, a gentle midnight rain begins to fall, its soft tapping against the thatched roof, sounding like countless tiny fingers drumming overhead. The elderly woman lifts her gaze toward you, her face partially hidden by shifting shadows cast by the firelight. Reaching into a dark wicker basket, she retrieves a small earthenware vial sealed with a stopper and filled with the lukewarm liquid. She hands it to you carefully. As you accept it, you notice the rough clay surface feels slightly warm and damp in your hand. There are no instructions attached to the bottle, no list of ingredients, and certainly no guarantee that it will work. All it offers is the quiet confidence of ancient folklore and the hope that this cloudy potion will somehow solve your romantic troubles. If modern dating apps seem exhausting, imagine gathering dangerous plants beneath moonlight, spending half your weekly earnings on a suspicious herbalist, and then trying to secretly slip a bottle of beetle-infused liquid into your beloved's morning ale without attracting the attention of protective family members. The level of effort involved makes swiping through profiles seem remarkably convenient by comparison. You secure the heavy vial inside your leather pouch, feeling its reassuring weight knock gently against your hip as you thank the healer and prepare to leave the smoky warmth of her hut behind. Outside, the night has become noticeably colder. The smell of wet earth and fresh rain now dominates the air, quickly washing away the lingering scent of burned herbs. You draw a long, steady breath, allowing the cool air to fill your lungs as you begin the quiet journey back toward the sleeping village. The world around you is dark and peaceful, interrupted only by the occasional call of an owl somewhere deep within the forest and the soft squelch of your shoes pressing into the rain-soaked ground. Each step feels deliberate and measured. The small earthenware vial taps gently against a spare copper coin in your pocket, producing a quiet metallic rhythm. There is something deeply calming about the steady pace of the walk. The darkness settles around your shoulders like a heavy cloak, and you move forward through the silent night, leaving the world of charms and potions behind as you prepare to face the watchful eyes of the village tomorrow. The next morning, you find yourself walking through a lush green orchard just outside the village walls, where the heavy branches of the apple trees are laden with young, unripened fruit. The air is crisp and incredibly sweet, carrying the gentle scent of morning dew, crushed clover, and the earthy dampness of ditches lining the pasture. You are not alone in this peaceful setting. A short distance ahead of you, a young couple is taking a slow stroll down the narrow dirt path. Their body language is remarkably stiff and unnatural, their shoulders tense and their hands rigidly pinned to their sides. This awkwardness is entirely justified because precisely 5 paces behind them walks a formidable, stern-looking older woman dressed in heavy, dark linen. Her eyes, sharp and unblinking beneath her stark white wimple, track every single microscopic movement of the young pair, like a hawk monitoring field mice in a harvested valley. This is the chaperone, an absolute staple of medieval romantic life, whose sole purpose in existence is to ensure that absolutely nothing spontaneous, interesting, or inappropriate occurs during this brief encounter. You try your best to look natural, perhaps pretending to inspect a low-hanging apple, as you maintain a respectful distance behind this bizarre trio, observing how the young man occasionally glances over his shoulder with a look of pure, unadulterated dread. Remember that murky love potion from the village healer we slipped into our leather pouch last night? It is completely useless in a situation like this, as you cannot exactly slip a secret elixir into someone's drink when a terrifying matriarch is breathing down your neck. Navigating the strict social gaze of protective chaperones, overprotective brothers, and nosy neighbors turned a simple daytime walk into a high-stakes espionage mission where a single unauthorized look or a lingering touch of the hands could spark a massive village scandal that would be discussed at the parish church for months. An incredibly strange detail from this era is that in many traditional medieval agrarian communities, social boundaries were protected by law and financial penalties. For instance, if a young man was caught holding a woman's hand, or, heaven forbid, stealing an unapproved kiss in public, he could be legally summoned before the local manorial court. The village council could force him to pay a hefty fine in silver coins, or compel him to perform weeks of grueling, free manual labor in the family's wheat fields to compensate for damaging the young woman's public reputation and lowering her family's social standing. You watch the young man's right hand twitch nervously at his side, clearly aching to reach out and touch the hem of her apron, but the sharp warning clear of the older woman behind him causes him to instantly freeze, straighten his back, and stare directly ahead at the dirt path as if he were a soldier on guard duty. Historians still debate about how strictly these rigid chaperone rules were actually enforced among the ordinary peasant classes, as opposed to the highly cloistered noble families. While wealthy noble daughters were locked away in castle towers and heavily guarded chambers, peasant youth often had far more practical opportunities to slip away into the haylofts, the deep woods, or the shadows of the watermill, while supposedly performing their daily agricultural chores. Still, the fear of public shaming and the omnipresent eyes of a tiny, gossipy community were incredibly powerful deterrents. In a small medieval village, everyone knew your name, your family's financial debts, how many bushels of barley you harvested, and exactly who you were looking at during Sunday Mass. You watch the trio turn a slow corner around a large, gnarled apple tree whose roots break through the packed dirt path. Their movements are so measured and solemn that it feels more like a funeral procession or a serious religious ritual than a romantic date between two young people in love. The rhythmic, muffled thud of their thick leather shoes on the hard-packed earth creates a steady, predictable sound that perfectly mirrors the calm, unhurried pace of medieval rural existence. The morning sun is filtering beautifully through the canopy of leaves overhead, casting shifting, intricate patterns of light and shadow across their cloaks and the vibrant green grass below. You can hear the pleasant, soft buzzing of bumblebees moving sleepily from flower to flower, completely indifferent to the rigid human drama unfolding just inches away from their hives. If you feel annoyed or anxious when someone leaves you on read for a few hours today, just imagine the sheer psychological endurance required to have your literal aunt stand 5 feet away from you while you try to awkwardly explain to your date that you think they have nice eyes or that you enjoyed their family's harvest feast. It is a level of social anxiety that makes modern dating look like an absolute luxury. The chaperone suddenly lets out a loud, dramatic, and entirely manufactured cough, signaling that the allocated time for the supervised walk has officially drawn to a close. The young couple instantly straightens their posture even further. The young woman drops her eyes meekly to the ground, folding her hands neatly over her linen apron, while the young man takes a deliberate step outward to establish a respectable, chaste distance between them. You slow your own pace down significantly, letting the group pull ahead until their dark cloaks disappear through the heavy wooden gate leading back into the bustling village square. The quiet orchard returns to its natural, undisturbed state of peace, leaving you alone with the gentle rustle of the morning wind moving through the apple branches. You take a long, slow, deep breath of the fresh, sweet air, letting the profound stillness of the trees calm your thoughts as you prepare to discover how medieval lovers managed to bypass these suffocating rules and communicate when the chaperones weren't looking. You slide onto a worn corner bench inside the smoky, dimly lit interior of the village tavern, your back pressing against the rough-hewn oak planks that have been stained dark by decades of spilled cider and wood smoke. The tavern is relatively quiet during this late afternoon hour, with only a few old farmers muttering in a far corner over wooden bowls of gray cabbage stew and stale barley bread. Your attention is drawn to a young woman sitting quietly near the small window, who is holding a seemingly random bunch of wildflowers she gathered from the meadow earlier today. She is carefully, methodically rearranging the stems, placing a bright yellow dandelion next to a pale blue cornflower, her movements slow, deliberate, and entirely focused. She isn't just making a pretty bouquet to decorate a table. She is composing a highly secret letter using the complex, silent language of floral arrangement and subtle physical gestures. To bypass the suspicious eyes of medieval guardians and ubiquitous chaperones, lovers had to develop entirely non-verbal codes that could communicate complex emotional states or plan secret rendezvous across a crowded room or a busy church service. Remember that intimidating chaperone from the orchard we encountered earlier? This silent system was the ultimate weapon against her watchful gaze. You watch as a young blacksmith's apprentice walks into the tavern under the guise of delivering a bundle of firewood, his eyes instantly sweeping the room until they land on the windowsill. A fascinating and highly unusual fact about this silent communication is that specific physical actions like pulling down the left sleeve of your tunic, shifting your market basket from your right arm to your left, or scratching your right earlobe, carried explicit, standardized messages like, "My father is watching, the path is clear," or "Meet me by the old watermill at twilight." The arrangement of flowers was equally specific. Certain field weeds indicated frustration or a warning of danger, while common kitchen herbs like thyme, rosemary, or mint could signal a promise of lifelong fidelity or an urgent request for a secret meeting. Historians still debate about whether these elaborate floral and gestural codes were actually part of a widespread, standardized system used by regular working-class people across Europe, or if individual couples simply made up their own private, localized signals that only they could decode. You watch the young apprentice set his heavy bundle of firewood down by the hearth with a loud, hollow thud, his eyes lingering on the blue cornflower for a fraction of a second before he gives a barely noticeable nod of understanding. He then casually touches his collar before turning around to walk back out the heavy oak door into the afternoon sunshine. It is an incredibly subtle dance of glances and movements, performed so seamlessly that the old tavern keeper wiping down the counter with a greasy rag doesn't notice a single thing. The tavern is filled with the low, comforting hum of a small fire crackling in the hearth, the wood popping occasionally and sending tiny, lazy sparks up the stone chimney. The light streaming through the small, grimy window panes is thick with dancing dust motes, creating a hazy, dreamlike atmosphere that makes the whole world feel slow, heavy, and remarkably peaceful. If you think managing your social media notifications or decoding text messages is exhausting today, imagine having to remember 30 different meanings for how you hold a bunch of parsley just to find out if your crush wants to walk by the river with you. The young woman looks thoroughly satisfied with her arrangement, placing the bouquet gently into a small clay jar on the window sill where the fading sunlight catches the colorful petals. She takes a slow, deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling gently as she leans her head against the wooden frame, staring out into the quiet, dusty street. You let your own eyes rest on the flickering flames of the hearth, the steady, radiating warmth of the room making your eyelids feel heavy and completely relaxed. The silent communication is finished. The secret message has been delivered without a single word being spoken, and the quiet rhythm of the afternoon continues to stretch out into the evening, carrying you closer to the practical, financial realities of medieval relationships. You find yourself sitting in a cold, drafty stone chamber belonging to the town notary, where the rough walls are lined with heavy oak shelves overflowing with rolled sheepskin parchments and dark ink ledgers. The room smells intensely of old vellum, dry animal glue, and the stale, heavy breath of three men who have been arguing over property lines and agricultural valuation for 4 grueling hours. You are perched on a hard wooden stool in the corner, watching a young man's father and a young woman's uncle lean aggressively over a scarred oak table, their tense faces illuminated by the flickering, unsteady light of a single, sputtering tallow candle. This is the dowry negotiation, the cold, hard financial foundation upon which almost every single medieval union is built, proving that even the most poetic medieval romance ultimately ends with a legal spreadsheet. Before any vows can be officially spoken at the church door or any symbolic tokens exchanged under the open sky, the families must agree on exactly what material goods and real estate the bride will bring into the marriage to support the new household. Remember that silent language of wildflowers we observed in the tavern yesterday? All of that delicate poetry is completely useless here, replaced by the hard reality of survival in a brutal agrarian economy. You watch the uncle slam his ink-stained fist lightly on the table, pointing a thick finger at a line of cramped Latin text on the parchment, demanding that 3 rusty iron kettles, a copper cauldron, and a half-blind milking cow be included in the final contract to balance the agreement. A highly unusual and somewhat hilarious fact about these medieval marriage contracts is that they went into excruciating, microscopic detail about everyday household junk. Scribes would list items like old bed sheets, specific wooden spoons, worn iron spades, individual sacks of barley, and even specific farm animals by their descriptive names, ensuring that if the marriage failed or a spouse died prematurely, everyone knew exactly who had the legal right to keep the family pig. The young groom-to-be sits quietly in the shadow of the pillar, looking completely miserable and detached, his romantic dreams of midnight walks being systematically ground down into a bitter, dry debate over agricultural equipment and livestock breeding rights. The historical consensus points to the fact that these arrangements were fundamental to safeguarding family property across generations. However, the emotional toll it took on the young couple involved remains an intriguing area of study. Indeed, historians still debate whether these intense commercial dowry negotiations were a source of deep, lifelong resentment between newly joined families, or if they were simply viewed as a completely normal, practical business transaction necessary to ensure the economic survival of a household in an era of unpredictable harvests and high mortality rates. To a modern observer, turning a romantic relationship into a legal battle over livestock feels incredibly unromantic and cold. But to the medieval mind, fleeting emotional love was temporary and unreliable, while a good, sturdy iron plow and a fertile field were forever. You listen to the dry, repetitive scratch of the notary's goose quill as he records the final amended agreement onto the rough parchment, the rhythmic sound like a small cricket chirping in the otherwise quiet stone room. The chamber is incredibly still, save for the slow, rhythmic bang of melted fat from the tallow candle onto the dark wood below, creating a small, pale mound of wax that mirrors the slow passage of time. The air in the room is cool and damp, making you pull your heavy wool cloak just a little tighter around your shoulders as you watch the 2 older men finally give a grim nod of mutual agreement, shaking hands over the document with satisfied expressions. If you think meeting your partner's parents for a tense dinner today is a stressful experience, imagine sitting silently while your father trades your future inheritance of 4 sheep just so you can marry the girl from the next parish. The notary blows a fine layer of river sand over the wet ink to dry it, the tiny grains making a soft, sweeping sound against the parchment before he rolls it up tightly into a neat cylinder and ties it with a piece of rough hemp string. The business transaction is officially finished, the financial price of love has been legally recorded, and the families finally prepare to celebrate the agreement. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the economic tension leave your muscles as you prepare to leave this cold stone office behind for something much more lively, loud, and delightfully unrefined out in the muddy open fields. You step out of the cold, suffocating stone walls of the notary's office and find yourself immediately swept up in a bright, chaotic wave of color, laughter, and music as you enter the village common on May Day morning. The rigid rules of the noble courts and the dry, calculating legal contracts of the town notary completely vanish here, replaced by the wild, unfiltered energy of ordinary country folk celebrating the long-awaited return of spring. The air is filled with the sweet, heavy scent of blooming hawthorn, roasting pork dripping into open fires, and the rich, earthy smell of trampled grass and wet mud. In the center of the common stands a massive wooden maypole, decorated with long, colorful ribbons that twist and turn as dozens of young peasants dance around it in a dizzying rhythmic circle that seems to vibrate with life. For the lower classes, seasonal festivals like May Day were the ultimate opportunity to escape the watchful eyes of strict landowners and parish priests, offering a rare, precious chance to flirt, dance, and mingle without a chaperone standing 5 feet away. Remember that tense dowry negotiation we witnessed in the notary's office? Out here in the mud, no one cares about half-blind milking cows or rusty iron kettles. The only currency that matters is a quick step and a bright smile. You watch a young field worker laugh heartily as he trips over a hidden root in the grass, pulling his dance partner down with him into the soft mud. Both of them covered in dirt, but completely unbothered by the mess as they scramble back to their feet. A fascinating and highly scandalous fact about these medieval spring festivals is that they were a source of deep anxiety and anger for the local church authorities. Priests and bishops frequently wrote long, furious letters complaining that young people would use the excuse of gathering green branches in the woods at midnight to engage in highly inappropriate, unsupervised romantic encounters under the cover of the trees. In fact, some grumbling medieval chroniclers went so far as to claim that up to a third of the young women returning from the May Day celebrations carried home far more than just wild bouquets, leading to a sudden boom in village weddings a few months later. Historians still debate exactly how much these seasonal festivals functioned as a necessary, temporary breakdown of societal rules, allowing ordinary peasants to blow off steam and choose their own romantic partners before returning to their grueling, heavily structured lives of agricultural labor. You walk past a group of local musicians playing lively, repetitive tunes on wooden pipes and goatskin drums, the deep thumping rhythm vibrating through the soles of your leather shoes and making your chest feel warm and relaxed. The energy here is contagious, but it is also wonderfully exhausting. A wild contrast to the quiet, slow pace of life you experienced in the apple orchard just days ago. The afternoon sun is high and warm, melting the remaining morning frost into the soil and creating a thick, sticky mud that clings to everyone's boots, turning the dance floor into a playful obstacle course. You see couples holding hands openly, sharing wooden cups of sweet blackberry ale, and laughing loudly at jokes you can't quite hear over the wheezing sound of the bagpipes. If you think modern music festivals are a chaotic place to meet someone, imagine doing it while wearing heavy homespun linen that hasn't been washed in months, surrounded by the entire population of your parish, and knowing that your employer is literally watching you from the castle tower. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in deep, sleepy shades of gold and violet, the frantic energy of the dancing starts to slow down into a gentle, swaying motion. The musicians switch to a softer, more melodic tune, their pipes mimicking the gentle evening wind blowing through the nearby willow trees. You find a quiet spot to sit on an overturned wooden cart, watching the campfires being lit across the field, their bright orange flames licking the darkening sky and casting long, lazy shadows across the common. You take a long, deep breath, letting the steady warmth of the fires and the rhythmic murmur of the tired crowd lull your mind into a state of calm, peaceful relaxation as the festive day comes to a gentle end. You are standing inside the quiet, cool interior of the parish church the following morning, where the air is thick with the scent of burning beeswax, damp stone, and the stale aroma of incense hanging heavily in the nave. The massive stone walls are covered in colorful, slightly faded frescoes, depicting saints and angels looking down with expressions of solemn, unblinking disapproval. You stand near the cold font, watching a young peasant couple listen intently to the local priest as he reads from a heavy, leather-bound volume of canon law. The priest is pointing a thick, ink-stained finger at a complicated calendar, explaining the endless, dizzying list of days throughout the year when dating, courtship, and especially marital relations are strictly forbidden by the church. The medieval church maintained an incredibly tight grip on the romantic schedules of its population, creating a complex web of holy days that made planning a relationship feel like navigating a legal minefield. Remember that wild May Day festival we just witnessed on the village common yesterday? The priest would have had some very severe penances for anyone who took the spring celebrations a step too far, likely involving walking barefoot around the cold churchyard for 3 consecutive Sundays while holding a penitential candle. You watch the young couple's faces fall as the priest explains that they cannot court, marry, or engage in any romantic activity during the entire seasons of Advent and Lent, nor on any of the dozens of saints' feast days that pepper the local calendar. An incredibly strange and restrictive fact about medieval religious romance rules is that when you added up all the mandatory fasting periods, major holy seasons, regular Sundays, and specific preparation days, romantic activity of any kind was technically banned for more than half of the days in a single calendar year. Historians still debate about how effectively the church could actually enforce these intimate calendar restrictions on ordinary people, especially those living in remote rural areas far from the bishop's watchful eye. While the threat of excommunication or public penance in front of your neighbors was terrifying, human nature often proved far more powerful than Latin decrees written on expensive parchment. You listen to the low, steady drone of the priest's voice as he recites the forbidden dates, his tone slow, monotonous, and rhythmic, creating a heavy, hypnotic cadence that echoes softly through the empty stone nave. The church is profoundly quiet, save for the occasional distant flutter of a small sparrow that has nested high up in the wooden rafters of the roof. The light filtering through the narrow lancet windows is cool and gray, illuminating the steady drift of dust motes hanging in the air like tiny, silent stars. If you think coordinating schedules with your partner today is difficult because of busy work weeks and personal hobbies, imagine having to check with a 13th century canon lawyer just to make sure you aren't committing a mortal sin by holding hands on a specific Thursday in autumn. The priest finally closes the heavy, iron-clasped book with a soft, muffled thud that signals the end of the lecture, leaving the young couple to walk out into the sunlit churchyard with a newfound appreciation for calendar management. You watch them go, their heads bowed slightly as they quietly discuss how to navigate the upcoming fasting season without breaking any official rules or drawing the anger of the parish. You take a slow, deep breath of the cool, damp church air, letting the profound silence of the ancient stone building settle over your mind, bringing a sense of calm, structured order to the chaotic world of medieval dating before you move back out into the bustling village. You find yourself looking over the shoulder of a professional town scribe who is hunched over a sloped wooden desk inside a small, cramped shop near the bustling market square. The room is filled with the sharp, acidic smell of oak gall ink and the scratchy, rhythmic sound of a goose quill scraping methodically across a sheet of rough parchment. The scribe's hand is incredibly steady, but his face is tight, with absolute concentration as he carefully transcribes a romantic poem written by a wealthy merchant's son who cannot read or write a single word himself. In the medieval world, if you wanted to send a beautiful, literate love letter to your beloved, you almost always had to hire a third party to do all the heavy linguistic lifting for you. The art of the medieval love letter was a highly structured and rigid affair, following strict rhetorical rules called the ars dictaminis, that dictated exactly how you should praise your lady's virtue, lament your own utter unworthiness, and beg for a single word of kindness to save you from despair. Remember that long list of forbidden church calendar days the priest read to us yesterday? Scribes had to be incredibly careful not to write anything too passionate or suggestive that might violate church teachings and get their clients into legal trouble with the local bishop. You watch the scribe carefully dip his sharpened quill into a hollow horn filled with dark, thick ink, pausing for a single moment to let the excess liquid drip back down so it doesn't leave a terrible blotch on the expensive parchment. A fascinating and highly awkward fact about this outsourced romance is that scribes would frequently use standardized templates from local formula books, meaning that your deeply personal, heartfelt love letter might contain the exact same phrases, metaphors, and adjectives that 30 other guys in the same neighborhood had used that very week to woo their respective sweethearts. The scribe laughs quietly to himself, a low chuckle that shakes his shoulders, as he corrects a glaring grammatical error made by his young client, who is pacing nervously outside the shop door, chewing anxiously on his fingernails and glancing at the sky. The historical consensus highlights how vital these professionals were for maintaining social connections in an era where reading was a specialized trade. However, the emotional authenticity of these collaborative texts remains a subject of great interest. Indeed, historians still debate about whether the recipients of these stylized letters were actually fooled by the beautiful handwriting and professional phrasing, or if everyone simply accepted that outsourced literacy was just a standard, expected part of the courtship game. You listen to the steady, repetitive scratch of the quill on vellum, a deeply soothing and predictable sound that fills the small room like the sound of dry autumn leaves scraping across a stone courtyard in a gentle evening wind. The afternoon light is slowly fading, casting a warm, sleepy amber glow over the scribe's cluttered desk and illuminating the fine textured grains of the animal skin paper. The scribe uses a small iron penknife to scrape away a tiny blotch of errant ink, his movements precise, calm, and utterly relaxed, demonstrating the immense patience required to communicate love before the invention of modern instant messaging. If you feel stressed when trying to craft the perfect witty reply to a message today, imagine having to pay a man 3 silver coins just to write a pre-written poem about how your crush's hair looks like spun silk, knowing that your letter might take 2 weeks to travel 3 miles on the back of a donkey. The scribe finally finishes the very last line of the ornate poem, blowing gently across the wet ink to speed up the drying process before rolling the parchment into a tight, neat cylinder. He seals it with a small dollop of melted red wax, pressing a heavy metal stamp into the warm pool to leave a clean, distinct mark that cannot be tampered with. He hands the finished letter to the nervous young man waiting outside, who accepts it as if it were made of solid gold, nodding his thanks before disappearing into the evening crowd. You take a deep, slow breath, letting the calm efficiency of the scribe's workshop soothe your thoughts as you prepare to see what kind of physical tokens these medieval lovers exchanged alongside their written words. You are standing under the weathered wooden awning of a silversmith's stall in the bustling heart of a mid-14th century market town. The air is thick and complex, carrying the sharp, metallic tang of hot iron from a nearby forge, the sweet aroma of roasted chestnuts popping over open grates, and the earthy scent of wet cobblestones. A brief afternoon shower has just passed, leaving the entire market square glistening under a soft, pearlescent sky that makes the world feel incredibly fresh and clean. You are watching a young peasant couple standing close together at the counter, their heads bowed as they examine a small, bent silver coin that the silversmith has just produced from a dark leather pouch. This is not regular currency to be traded for bread or ale. It is a betrothal token, a physical manifestation of a romantic promise that carries immense weight in the community. In the medieval world, exchanging tokens of affection was a critical milestone in the courtship process, serving as visible proof to everyone in the village that two people were officially bound to one another. Remember that beautiful love letter the scribe drafted for the merchant's son yesterday? A physical token like this was the logical next step, translating those written words into a tangible reality. You watch the young man take the small silver coin and deliberately bend it in half using a pair of iron pliers, a traditional practice meant to symbolize that the coin was now completely unique, could never be spent in a normal transaction, and represented an unbreakable bond between them. An incredibly strange and slightly morbid fact about medieval romantic keepsakes is that lovers would often exchange tokens that were far more intimate than metal. Suitors would frequently present their sweethearts with a small lock of hair tucked inside a tiny, damp leather pouch, or even a piece of linen cloth that had been soaked in their own sweat during a hard day's work in the harvest fields. This was based on the deep-rooted belief that a person's physical secretions and hair held the literal spiritual essence of their being, allowing their beloved to keep a piece of their physical soul close at all times. The young woman accepts the bent silver coin with a solemn nod, carefully slipping it into a secret pocket sewn inside her heavy woolen kirtle, right against her ribs. The legal and social implications of these gifts were taken very seriously by the local authorities, often leading to complicated disputes if the relationship dissolved. Indeed, historians still debate about how legally binding these exchanges of romantic tokens actually were under church law. In many cases, a public promise accompanied by a physical gift, like a ring, a pair of gloves, or a bent coin, could be used in a church court to prove that a legal, unalterable marriage had already taken place, even if a priest had never spoken a blessing over the couple. This meant that accepting a seemingly innocent gift from an admirer was a high-stakes decision that could accidentally lock you into a legal marriage before you had even met the rest of their family or negotiated a proper dowry. You listen to the steady, rhythmic hammering of a blacksmith working across the market square, the dull, metallic clink of iron on iron creating a comforting, predictable background noise that grounds the moment in the reality of everyday medieval labor. The air is growing noticeably cooler as the market begins to wind down for the evening, with tired merchants packing their remaining wares into heavy wooden crates and pulling canvas tarps over their stalls to protect them from the night dew. The sky above the timber-framed houses is turning a deep, twilight indigo, and the first few tallow candles are being lit in the upper windows, their warm amber light reflecting beautifully in the small rain puddles on the cobblestones. If you think picking out the perfect anniversary gift or engagement ring today is a stressful experience, imagine having to save your own hair or bend a piece of currency just to show someone you care about them, knowing that the gesture could legally bind your finances for the rest of your life. The young couple finally walks away from the stall, their shoulders touching lightly as they disappear down a narrow, shadowy side street, leaving you alone under the quiet awning. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the cool evening air clear your mind as you listen to the fading, sleepy sounds of the market town, prepared to move forward into the grand spectacles where romance and high society chivalry collided. You find yourself sitting on a hard wooden bench in the grand tournament stands, elevated high above a long, dusty field bordered by bright silk banners that flutter lazily in the afternoon breeze. The air is thick with the scent of crushed grass, hot leather, and the heavy musk of sweat-soaked war horses pacing nervously behind the wooden barriers. Below you, thousands of spectators from all walks of life are cheering and shouting, creating a wall of sound that vibrates through the wooden timbers of the stands. Your focus, however, is on a knight clad in gleaming, polished steel armor who is sitting atop a massive black stallion just before the starting line of the jousting lane. This is the tournament, the ultimate stage where the brutal reality of medieval warfare is transformed into an elaborate theatrical pageant of romantic devotion. Remember those secret floral codes from the tavern we observed earlier? Here, the symbols are massive, public, and impossible to miss. You watch as a noble lady sitting just a few rows in front of you reaches up to untie a long, brilliant blue silk ribbon from her sleeve, leaning over the wooden railing to drop it down to the squire waiting below. A fascinating and highly dramatic fact about these tournament tokens is that knights would attach these ribbons, called favors, to their lances or helmets, charging into combat with the explicit goal of defending their lady's honor. Sometimes these displays became so intense that ladies would strip off entire sleeves, veils, or tunics until they were sitting in their undergarments just to provide tokens for their favorite champions. The knight below takes the blue ribbon, ties it carefully around his steel gauntlet, and lowers his heavy wooden lance as the trumpet sounds. The social dynamics of these games were highly influential in shaping noble families and reputations. Indeed, historians still debate about whether these displays of tournament chivalry were driven by genuine romantic affection, or if they were simply highly calculated political performances designed to boost a knight's social status and secure wealthy patrons among the nobility. You watch the two armored men charge at each other at terrifying speeds, the heavy thud of their horses' hooves creating a rhythmic rolling thunder that echoes across the field. With a massive, splintering crash, one of the lances shatters against the opponent's shield, sending showers of wooden splinters flying into the air, while the crowd erupts into a frenzy of cheers. The knight with the blue ribbon remains upright, raising his gauntlet to the stands in victory, while his horse slides to a gentle halt in the dirt. The dust slowly settles over the field, dancing in the long shafts of afternoon sunlight that cut across the arena. The frantic energy of the violence begins to drain away, replaced by the slow, organized movements of squires clearing the field and heralds announcing the next match. If you think modern sports events are an intense place to impress a date, imagine having to ride a literal horse at 30 miles an hour while someone tries to hit you with a giant stick just to get a piece of silk from a girl you've only looked at across a crowded room. The sun is beginning to sink behind the distant hills, painting the sky in deep shades of crimson and violet that mirror the colorful pageantry of the day. The noise of the crowd fades into a low, contented murmur as people begin to head toward the great hall for the evening feast. You take a deep, slow breath, letting the adrenaline of the tournament wash out of your system as the quiet, cool shadow of the evening covers the grand stands, bringing a peaceful end to the day's dramatic spectacles. You step off the dusty tournament grounds and find yourself instantly immersed in the narrow, winding streets of 14th century London, where the timber-framed houses lean so close together overhead that they almost completely block out the twilight sky. The air is thick and heavy, carrying the distinct smell of river mud from the nearby Thames, frying salt fish from a street vendor's cart, and the pungent scent of wood smoke hanging low in the damp evening air. The cobblestones beneath your boots are slick and uneven, forcing you to walk slowly as you navigate past groups of young apprentices who are busy locking up their shop stalls for the night. You stop near a small, brightly lit tavern window, your attention drawn to an elderly woman with sharp, incredibly intelligent eyes who is leaning over a heavy wooden table piled high with financial ledgers and scribbled notes on scrap parchment. This is a professional town matchmaker, the ultimate architect of urban romance, who views love not as a poetic fantasy, but as a complex puzzle of financial stability and social mobility. In the rapidly growing medieval cities, the casual romantic encounters of village festivals were frequently replaced by a highly organized commercial system of matchmaking, where families paid professionals to find the perfect economic partner for their children. Remember that intense dowry negotiation we witnessed in the notary's Cold Stone office? The urban matchmaker takes that exact concept and turns it into a highly profitable, full-time business, using town gossip, merchant guild reputations, and documented financial assets to pair unsuspecting singles across the city parishes. You watch her trace her calloused finger down a long list of names, carefully comparing the annual income of a young merchant guild member with the family connections and property assets of a prosperous baker's daughter. A highly unusual and fascinating fact about these urban matchmakers is that they didn't just look at coin and real estate, they also meticulously evaluated the moral and social reputation of the candidates. They would routinely check with neighbors and parish priests to see if a young man drank too much ale at the local tavern, or if a young woman was prone to loud public arguments in the market square, because a single bad reputation could ruin a delicate family business and its credit lines overnight. The level of control exerted by these commercial matchmakers often created significant tension within families, as personal desires clashed with economic survival. Indeed, historians still debate about how much agency young people living in medieval cities actually had when it came to rejecting the rigid matches made by these professional brokers. While legal records from the church courts show that some exceptionally brave individuals successfully sued to break unwanted engagements by proving they were forced into them, the vast majority of urban youth simply accepted that their romantic and financial destiny was a decision best left to the seasoned experts who understood the market conditions. You listen to the low, rhythmic murmur of the matchmaker's voice as she methodically discusses a potential pairing with an anxious father, her tone calm, measured, and entirely devoid of any romantic sentimentality. The street outside the window is growing noticeably quiet as the night deepens, the busy sounds of the daytime commerce fading into the soft, repetitive lapping of the river water against the distant wooden docks. A single town watchman paces past your hiding spot, his iron lantern casting a swinging rhythmic shadow against the white plaster walls of the surrounding houses. If you think modern online dating algorithms are cold, clinical, and impersonal today, imagine having an old neighborhood woman analyze your literal family credit score and your neighbor's opinions of your temper, just to decide if you are socially allowed to buy dinner for someone. The matchmaker finally closes her heavy ledger with a satisfying, muffled thud, blowing out one of her sputtering tallow candles and leaving the room in a soft, dim light that feels remarkably peaceful and secure. The decisions have been finalized. The economic futures of two merchant families have been neatly aligned, and the quiet weight of the urban night settles fully over the city. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the steady, organized calmness of the matchmaker's workspace bring a sense of structure to your thoughts as you prepare to see what happened when these carefully planned matches went completely wrong. You are sitting in a dark, quiet corner of a bustling neighborhood tavern watching a romantic encounter go completely off the rails at a nearby table. The air is warm and heavy with the scent of cheap ale, roasted onions, and the damp wool of patrons seeking shelter from a sudden evening downpour. At the table in front of you, a young merchant's son is trying desperately to impress a woman from a wealthy tanning family, but every single thing he does seems to make the situation worse. He has hired a local lute player to stand right next to their table and serenade her, but the musician is terribly out of tune, producing a series of sharp, discordant plucks that make everyone in the room wince. Bad dates are not a modern invention. They have existed for as long as human beings have attempted to impress one another, and the medieval world had its own unique brand of romantic disasters. Remember that elaborate courtly love poetry from the first section we watched? This young man is attempting to recite it, but he keeps forgetting the lines, stuttering over his words while his date stares at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated boredom. To make matters worse, he accidentally knocks over his wooden trencher, spilling a thick, greasy pool of mutton gravy directly onto his expensive, newly dyed green tunic. An incredibly strange and hilarious fact about medieval dating disasters is found in the legal records of the time, which show that some dates went so poorly that frustrated suitors actually attempted to sue each other in small claims courts. They would demand full refunds for the cost of the ale, pasties, and hired musicians they had wasted on an unsuccessful courtship, claiming breach of verbal promise. Sifting through these archival records reveals a surprisingly litigious side to broken hearts. Indeed, historians still debate whether these recorded dating disasters were common occurrences or just rare, extreme examples that happened to catch the attention of bored court scribes who wanted to note down a laugh. You watch the young woman sigh deeply, leaning her chin on her hand as she watches the gravy slowly soak into the young man's sleeve, completely ignoring his frantic attempts to wipe it away with a piece of stale bread. The rhythmic, repetitive patter of the rain against the tavern's leaded glass windows provides a soothing, melancholy soundtrack to this unfolding social catastrophe. The tavern fire pops softly, sending a warm glow over the awkward couple and highlighting the sheer distance between them, despite sitting at the same small table. If you feel embarrassed when you make a bad joke on a date today, just imagine doing it while wearing a gravy-stained tunic with a terrible musician playing a broken lute right in your ear, and knowing that your entire village will hear about your failure by sunrise tomorrow. It is a level of romantic humiliation that transcends time and technology. The young woman finally stands up, adjusts her linen hood with a sharp, decisive snap, and walks out into the rainy night without saying a single word, leaving the young man alone with his ruined outfit and his out-of-tune musician. He sinks back into his chair, letting out a long, defeated sigh that seems to echo the general exhaustion of the room. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the tension of their awkward encounter dissolve as the tavern returns to its usual, quiet hum, preparing your mind for the mystical forces people turn to when human effort completely failed. You step out of the noisy, rain-slicked courtyard of the tavern and begin climbing a steep, narrow spiral staircase that twists up through the heart of a quiet stone tower. The air grows noticeably cooler with every step you take, changing from the heavy, stale atmosphere of the crowded streets below to a fresh, crisp alpine breeze that smells of high altitudes and wet stone. As you reach the topmost chamber, you find yourself in the circular study of a starry-eyed medieval scholar who has dedicated his entire life to mapping the invisible threads that connect the human heart to the movements of the cosmos. The room is beautifully serene, illuminated by the pale silver light of a high moon streaming through large, unglazed, arched windows that frame a breathtaking view of sleeping forests and quiet fields stretching out to the dark horizon. The shelves are packed with heavy leather tomes, and the large wooden table in the center is covered in intricate astrological charts, brass astrolabes, and geometric diagrams mapping the zodiac. When human matchmakers failed to provide answers, and when love potions from the village healer result in nothing but stomach aches, medieval lovers would routinely turn their eyes to the heavens. In the medieval mind, the macrocosm of the universe was perfectly mirrored in the microcosm of human relationships, meaning that the positions of the stars at the exact moment of your birth held the absolute blueprint for your romantic compatibility. You watch the scholar lift a heavy pair of brass dividers, his fingers moving with slow, academic reverence as he measures the precise angular distance between Venus and Mars on a freshly inked vellum chart. Remember that commercial urban matchmaker we watched pricing love by credit score and reputation in the city? This is the cosmic version of that exact same process where your personality, traits, potential marital arguments, and long-term domestic happiness are calculated using mathematical formulas inherited from ancient times. A fascinating and highly unusual fact about these medieval astrological consultations is that matching couples wasn't just about their birth signs, but how those signs interacted with their intended daily professions. Astrologers of the era firmly believed that different trades were ruled by specific planetary bodies. For instance, a scholar might meticulously calculate a chart and solemnly warn a young woman that because her birth aligned with the gentle, artistic energies of Taurus, marrying a blacksmith's apprentice born under the volatile, fiery influence of Scorpio would inevitably lead to a lifetime of explosive domestic arguments, burnt dinners, and broken pottery. The young client waiting in the shadows nods slowly, absorbing this stellar advice with a mix of awe and deep anxiety, realizing that the entire universe apparently has an opinion on her love life. The widespread popularity of these cosmic readings shows how deeply rooted the desire for certainty was in an unpredictable world. Indeed, historians still debate about how deeply ordinary working-class people allowed astrology to actually dictate their practical, everyday romantic choices, given that hiring a professional scholar to cast a detailed natal chart was an expensive luxury, usually reserved for wealthy nobles arranging international royal treaties. Still, the comforting belief that your personal affection was woven into the fabric of the stars was a powerful psychological shield against the harsh realities of everyday survival. You listen to the soft, rhythmic clicking of the heavy brass astrolabe as the scholar slowly turns its engraved metal plates, a delicate metallic ticking sound that fills the profound silence of the stone tower like an ancient clock counting down the night. The silver moonlight cuts sharply across the floorboards, casting long, elegant shadows and illuminating the fine, shimmering dust motes that float sleepily through the air like a galaxy of tiny stars. The vast world below the tower is completely dark, silent, and at peace, making you feel as though you have stepped completely outside of time itself. If you think checking your horoscope on a smartphone app today is a fun, casual distraction before a first date, imagine saving half a year's agricultural wages just to have a man read a parchment scroll to tell you if the current positioning of Jupiter means you should call off your engagement. The scholar finally sets his dividers down with a soft click, a satisfied smile breaking across his weathered face as he concludes that the cosmic alignment is indeed favorable for his client's upcoming union. He rolls up the heavy chart with a smooth, sweeping motion, securing it with a thin blue silk ribbon that catches the silver light of the moon. You take a long, slow, deep breath of the crisp night air, letting the immense quiet order of the universe wash over your mind, replacing your modern worries with the timeless stillness of the stars as you prepare to descend the tower and step into the frantic, earthly chaos of the grand wedding feast. You descend from the silent, starry heights of the Scholar's Tower and find yourself stepping directly into the roaring, high-stress environment of a massive castle kitchen early the next morning. The contrast is immediate and overwhelming to the senses. The cool night breeze is instantly replaced by a thick, suffocating blanket of white steam, the rich, heavy scent of roasting wild boar dripping into open trenches of fire, and the sharp, nasal stinging aroma of imported cloves, ginger, and cinnamon. The stone floor beneath your boots is coated in a fine layer of spilled flour, discarded herb stems, and grease, making every step you take soft, muffled, and slightly slick as you quickly move out of the way of a giant cook carrying a whole, intact sturgeon on a silver platter over his shoulder. This is the absolute peak of preparation for a grand medieval wedding feast, a logistical and culinary nightmare that makes modern wedding catering look like an absolute walk in the park. Once the financial dowry contracts have been signed by the notary, the chaperones satisfied, and the cosmic alignments officially cleared by the astronomer, the families are obligated to host a massive dinner to publicly celebrate the union and prove their wealth to the entire region. Remember that quiet, calculated business deal over livestock we witnessed earlier? Out here in the kitchens, that wealth is being literally melted down, roasted, and served to hundreds of hungry guests. You watch a chief cook frantically bark orders at a group of young scullery boys who are stirring a massive copper cauldron filled with a thick yellow almond milk soup, their heavy wooden paddles moving in a slow, hypnotic circle that looks like a slow-motion whirlpool. A highly unusual and somewhat terrifying fact about medieval wedding cuisine is the absolute obsession with what were called subtleties. Elaborate theatrical food sculptures made of sugar, wax, and pastry that were designed to look like mythical beasts, castles, or famous historical battles. Sometimes these spectacular dishes were designed to be interactive entertainment. Pastry cooks would construct massive, hollow pie crusts filled with live frogs or small blackbirds that would literally leap and fly out across the dining hall the moment the bride cut into the crust, causing a chaotic scramble of animals across the table linens while the drunken guests roared with laughter. The immense expenditure required for these feasts often placed a massive burden on the host families, sometimes altering their financial futures for years. Indeed, historians still debate about how much money aristocratic and merchant families would ruin themselves spending on these single-day wedding celebrations, as the immense social pressure to outdo your neighbors often led to catastrophic amounts of debt that would take decades of agricultural labor and heavy taxation to pay off. You watch a kitchen maid carefully arrange hundreds of tiny spiced meat pies onto a heavy pewter tray, her movements rhythmic, precise, and calm despite the screeching and shouting echoing around the room. The steady, repetitive thumping of a kitchen boy chopping fresh parsley on a thick oak block creates a predictable, grounding beat that cuts through the noise of the roaring stone ovens. The ambient heat radiating from the massive fireplaces is intense, making your skin flush as entire pigs and sheep are turned on iron spits by sweaty, exhausted apprentices who have been awake since midnight. The morning light streaming through the high, arched windows is thick with floating smoke and flower dust, creating a hazy, golden, almost dreamlike atmosphere that makes the frantic scene feel incredibly distant. If you think managing a seating chart or choosing a vegetarian option today is a stressful experience, imagine having to worry about whether your live animal pie is going to accidentally attack the local bishop during the main course. The chief cook finally stands back, wiping his brow with the back of his sleeve and giving a sharp, definitive nod of approval as the very first course is lifted onto the shoulders of a dozen uniformed servers. They march out toward the great hall in a long, solemn, rhythmic line, their steps perfectly synchronized as they prepare to present the feast. The frantic energy of the kitchen instantly drops a fraction, leaving a warm, heavy, exhausted quiet in its wake while the embers continue to radiate their gentle, sleepy heat. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the rich smells and the steady warmth of the stone ovens completely relax your body as you prepare to witness the final, quiet culmination of this long, bizarre, medieval, romantic journey. You emerge from the heavy, roasting warmth of the castle kitchens and step out under the grand stone archway of the parish church door, just as the final, long shadows of the late afternoon stretch lazily across the quiet village square. The air here is instantly refreshing, cool, still, and incredibly peaceful, carrying the faint, sweet scent of green rushes that have been freshly laid over the steps and the comforting smell of wood smoke drifting from the distant village chimneys. Before you, the young couple stands hand in hand on the smooth stone steps, their faces worn but serene, surrounded by their silent, tired families who have watched them navigate every bizarre and exhausting stage of this medieval courtship. The parish priest raises his hands, his wide linen sleeves fluttering slightly in the evening breeze, and his voice drops to a low, rhythmic murmur as he begins to deliver the final Latin blessings that will legally and spiritually bind them together under the eyes of the community. In the medieval world, the actual exchange of wedding vows and the legal binding of the couple did not take place inside the sanctuary. Instead, it traditionally happened right outside at the church door, under the open sky and in full view of any passing neighbors who could act as witnesses. Remember that endless list of forbidden church calendar days and fasting periods we learned about from the priest earlier? The couple has successfully managed to dodge every single religious restriction, arriving at this very moment without breaking a single law, causing a local scandal, or invoking the wrath of the bishop's courts. A fascinating and deeply touching fact about these church door ceremonies is that immediately after the vows were spoken, the groom would drop a handful of gold and silver coins into the bride's open palms. This beautiful traditional gesture, known as the RA, was a symbolic demonstration to the entire parish that he was willingly sharing 100% of his earthly wealth, property, and worldly goods with her. From that exact second forward, you watch the metallic tokens glint softly in the fading amber sunlight as they spill from his leather gauntlet into her hands, making a sharp, musical clinking sound that seems to signal the absolute peaceful conclusion of their long romantic quest. The real nature of these historical partnerships often looked very different from the idealized poetry written by noble scribes or sung by wandering troubadours. Indeed, historians still debate about how much genuine, affectionate love existed in these everyday marriages compared to the brutal economic and social pressures that forced families to treat their children like real estate transactions. But looking at the quiet, undeniable relief washing over the couple's faces right now, it becomes clear that survival in the harsh medieval world was always a little easier when you had a trusted partner to share the heavy burden of the harvest. The priest finishes his final prayer with a soft amen, and the small gathered crowd lets out a collective gentle sigh, their bodies relaxing as the immense tension of the week's preparations finally drains away into the earth. The newly wedded couple turns and walks slowly into the cool, dark, quiet interior of the church for their celebratory mass, their leather shoes making a soft, rhythmic clicking sound against the ancient stone floor until the shadows swallow them up. The village around you is growing profoundly still as the sun dips fully beneath the distant blue hills, painting the wide sky in soft, sleepy shades of deep indigo and dark amber. The birds are settling into the thick thatch of the roofs, their evening chirps growing slower, quieter, and more spaced apart with each passing minute. If you think modern relationships are complicated and exhausting today, you can now see that human beings have always found ways to connect, adapt, and build meaningful lives together, no matter how many strict laws, terrifying chaperones, or questionable love potions stood in their way. The light in the cobblestone square has faded completely now, replaced by the gentle, silver glow of a rising moon that covers the entire sleeping valley in a soft, protective blanket of darkness. The heavy oak doors of the church close with a soft, distant thud, shutting out the rest of the world and leaving the night in perfect, uninterrupted silence. You take a long, slow, deep breath, letting your chest rise and fall in perfect harmony with the quiet, steady rhythm of the sleeping town, feeling completely safe, relaxed, and ready to let go of the day's long journey. The long trek through the twisted, fascinating paths of medieval romance is officially finished. The stories have all been told, and the long, peaceful night has arrived to carry your mind away. Let the images of the flickering castle hearths, the quiet apple orchards, the scribe scraping quills, and the grand stone towers slowly dissolve from your thoughts, leaving behind only the soft, warm stillness of the present moment. Your breathing is slow, steady, and wonderfully deep. Your eyelids are incredibly heavy, and the world around you is completely at peace. Sink down into the comfort of the darkness. Let the quiet rhythm of the night wrap around your shoulders and allow yourself to drift away into a deep, restful, and beautiful sleep.